Good morning everyone, and welcome to the webinar on 5 ways to build credibility. This is when speaking and presenting. The reason I present on this topic is because many people get before an audience and they speak confidently, they speak authentically, but people don't buy their message. They don't get the traction that they would like because they just don't have that credibility. So if you write and prepare a perfect presentation, you deliver it very eloquently, very effectively, and you don't have change, you don't have people adopting your idea, it could be that your credibility is lacking. Good morning, Desiree, and good morning, a few other people just checking in now. We're just underway. 5 ways to build credibility. So Peter Dew's my name. I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and my passion is simply to help you guys become the best you can through the spoken word, sharing your knowledge, your passion, your energy, the knowledge that helps your clients move to a better place. A couple of new names on the webinar. Please take notes, ask questions, comment. You've got the question dialogue box that you can type in at any time. Don't wait for me to say, does that make sense? And even ask questions after the webinar. You have my email address. You can send an email and say, hey, Peter, I forgot to ask you this question, or can you tell me more about this? More importantly, I think one of the most important things is the ability to think and apply. So recall a recent presentation if you can, or maybe a presentation you've got coming up. What are you going to do to make that presentation more credible? If I just talk to you today and you think that's nice and you don't apply it to your own personal circumstances, then that's not of much value. Think of a presentation gone or one coming up, a meeting. What can you do to come across more credible? First question, what is credibility? I'll give you a moment. Just type in the question and answer box, what do you think credibility means? You've seen credible speakers, you've seen less than credible speakers. What does credibility mean for you? Just type in those words. I'll give you a few moments. No need to Google, just your impression. What does credibility mean to you? It means evidence that you know what you're talking about, yes. It's your license to be able to put an idea forward. Yes, that's credibility. That's consistency of your behavior with your message. Yes, that adds to your credibility. It's also congruency. What other words do you have for credibility? It's trust. Yes, credibility and trust go hand in hand. As your credibility goes up, people will trust you to disrupt them, to put a new idea forward more. They do go hand in hand. Let me put one other aspect of credibility before you. Your credibility is defined by your audience. So you've got a PhD, you've published a lot of stuff, you've done some research, and the audience thinks that you are not credible, then you're not credible. You don't get to decide that you're credible. It's the audience that decides if you are credible in what you're saying or not. And that's kind of tough love. You can do everything that I'm doing or that I'm going to share with you today to increase your credibility. However, should the audience not agree with you, then you're not coming across as credible. It is true you'll have mixed audiences, so your credibility with one part of the audience will be high and the other part of the audience just won't believe you. And that's just the nature of the beast. So credibility as a trait is assigned by the audience, not by you. So what are some tips, 5 tips to become more credible? The first tip is to use your own personal experiences to build credibility. If you have overcome adversity, if you have brought a project that was struggling back on track, if you've had success in bringing an organization around, in reducing expenditure, in increasing productivity, if your failures have given you lessons for life, lessons that have then helped you move on, if your story is one that illustrates courage, then you need to share your story. Your story is authentic. Your story is unique to you. And from a presentation perspective, your story, you don't have to learn or script it. So feel free to share your story as a way of increasing your credibility. Those of you who've been to my workshops know that part of my story is that I'm a person who stutters. I had a really hard time at high school and university and my early adult life. Even into my mid-adult life, I had a really hard time. I didn't volunteer to speak. I avoided speaking. In my work, in my coaching, in my training, helping people become more confident, overcome fear, and become more effective in their speakership, in their presentation skills, my journey of not being able to speak, of stuttering badly, to speaking for my living adds to my credibility. What story can you use to add to your credibility the next time you speak? What stories have you used in the past? And in terms of using your personal experiences, you don't have to call them stories. They can be case studies. They can be anecdotes. They can be experiences, both positive and negative. There's lots of lessons. There's nuggets and gems around those struggles and those things that don't work out right. And I'm fairly reticent to even use the word failure. It's not really a failure. It's more of a lesson. And if you share that lesson, that'll give you credibility. The concept of building a bank of stories. So when you work with a group of people with a disability, maybe you're going to work with a group of miners and engineers. Now you're going to work with a group of health professionals. I sometimes work with Aboriginal people. I'm going to build a bank of stories that I can use. I'm going to talk more on this concept towards the end around the right story. So, tip number 1 for increasing your credibility, use your own personal experiences. Your journey, the stuff that you have done to reach success. No one can deny that you did that. No one can deny that you climbed Mount Everest or whatever you did. Use quotes or other people's experiences. You can borrow credibility. Good morning, Janet, or good afternoon. I suspect you're a Eastern States person. We've started a little bit, and I'm talking about building your credibility. This is about borrowing credibility. You might be a new graduate and you might not have those experiences those stories that you can share with people. So sometimes you need to borrow credibility. And in my workshop, I often start with a quotation. If I'm working with people who have a fear of public speaking, I will start with the quote. Mark Twain said there's two kinds of speakers in this world, those that are nervous and those that are liars. Now, Peter Dew will also tell you, I will also tell you that public speaking, the fear of public speaking may never go away. If Mark Twain says one thing and I say the same thing, well, surely I must be right. Surely I must be right. I also start my other workshop about presentation skills. Winston Churchill said, if you can stand on your feet and speak to a group of people, you possess a very powerful skill. What I'm going to say to you is that if you've got that ability to engage and move an audience, then you have that ability to create the change, the ability to create the outcomes that you want. I'm saying the same thing as Winston Churchill in different words. So I've borrowed credibilities to help people believe more of what I'm saying. Another workshop I do is called Thinking and Speaking Off the Cuff. And one of the things I say about off the cuff, speaking without notice, is you need to prepare. And people say, but you can't prepare for an off the cuff presentation, off the cuff speaking. You weren't expecting that question. And what I say is, and I throw up a series of quotes, and one of them is, Winston Churchill says all the best speeches, the best impromptu speeches are written well in advance. In other words, he's talking about preparation for that off the cuff. When you walk into a hostile room, you know what questions you're going to be asked. That's about preparation. So what quotes can you use, or what other information can you use, can you borrow to increase your own credibility? One of the things we do a lot, or my wife does a lot, in difficult conversations and assertiveness, and she did some study at Harvard University, Harvard Law, and they have a magazine called Harvard Business Review, of which we subscribe, and they do some world-leading research. And if Harvard says if Harvard research shows you that, and my experience working with people is the same thing, when I use Harvard, when I borrow Harvard statistic or a Harvard model, then I'm borrowing credibility. When you borrow credibility, please acknowledge the source of the credibility. Mark Twain, Winston Churchill, Harvard Business Review. You need to acknowledge where you got your source from. For new people starting out, they don't have 10 years of experience. They haven't had those real difficult customers yet. Borrow your credibility. Use quotations or other people's experiences. Maybe the Canadians are doing something innovative in social housing. Maybe the superannuation industry in Canada has got some wonderful skills. I was reading about this concept of young people should access their superannuation to be able to buy their first home. And if I'm a financial planner and my position is, no, this is a bad idea, we shouldn't touch our superannuation funds of our young people to help them buy a house. The Canadians tried this 10 years ago and it has not worked out well. Tip number 2 is tip number 2 in building credibility, use quotes from other people. Janet, you came on late. I'm just going to go back to tip number 1, which is, tip number 1 is use your own stories to build credibility. Your stories of success, your stories of overcoming adversity. Tip number 2 is use quotes. Tip number 3 is write and publish. If you want to set yourself up as an expert in helping older people transition to retirement, in helping people decide what to do in terms of after school with a child with an intellectual disability. Are you an expert? What is your blog post, your website? Have you published journals in your respective profession? Even your LinkedIn profile, you can post expert articles that you've written, expert opinions that help you build that authority, that expertise, that credibility around what you're talking about. So if you go to my LinkedIn, Peter Dew, you'll see I've published quite a few articles around public speaking. I also create a bi-monthly newsletter, which if you've attended one of my workshops, you will get my bi-monthly newsletter. You can unsubscribe at any stage. I have 2 books that I've authored by myself. One of them is 7 Steps to Overcome Your Fear of Public Speaking. The second book and audio CD is How to Write a Killer Speech. They're for sale on my website. I bring them to most of my workshops. Are you a published expert? What research, what material are you doing to help build your authority, your credibility? I'm just going to pause for a moment. Are there any questions on those first 3 strategies to build credibility? That's the first question. Second question, who regularly contributes to a forum one way or another through the written form? Yes, LinkedIn posts are good. And one thing for your credibility, you don't always have to write LinkedIn. You can share someone else's posts. So when you see Harvard or the CPA Australia post something on LinkedIn, you can curate that. You can share that with your connections and you can add your own take and agree with them or add a proviso or a different angle on what the CPA has written from your experience. And that does build credibility. So you don't have to be a best-selling author. You don't have to be Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, to be good at time management. You can refer to Stephen Covey, but you can also write your own experiences and your own tips and tricks around good time management. So thanks for those comments. Does anyone write at the moment? Just type in the dialog box, do you contribute to your industry journal, your staff newsletter? Okay. Published a paper and presented a paper in Sydney for the mining sector. Thank you for that. That's got to be great. That gives you great credibility when you speak at a conference. Now, these 5 tips are not the entire palette of credibility things that you have open to you. So presenting and being invited to present at a conference does give you credibility. Use credible data sources. So when you use statistics, information, numbers, 1 in 5 Australians will suffer from mental ill health at some stage in their lives. I think I've heard that once or twice, or is it 1 in 4? That wouldn't sound very credible. I was in Bendigo a few years ago and I was teaching public speaking and someone stood up and said, every week an Australian woman loses their life at the hands of their partner. Of course, he's talking about domestic violence, and around 50 to 60 women lose their life as a result of domestic violence, family violence. Their partners, 90% husbands, kill them. And someone in the room said, wow, that's a lot. Where did you get your data from? And she said, I don't know. That it just is that a woman loses their life every week of the year. So her credibility in the eyes of everyone else in the room just went down a little bit. When you're using data, make sure you use a reliable source. Multiple sources is good as well. World Health Organization, Australian Bureau of Statistics, UNESCO, CPA, Certified Practicing Accountants, the Financial Planners Association of Australia. Where does that data come from? And if you've got multiple sources that back it up, then that's really good. Some of you know my background as a medical scientist, and as people discover scientific new breakthroughs in medicine, antibiotics, they need that research to be reproducible. So you'll find there's multiple studies, and some people do meta-analysis. So they grab 10 or 15 scientific studies from around the world on the same topic, and in a really good, credible piece of work, all of the studies draw the same conclusion. Where does your data come from? Do you use data in your presentations? Apparently 90% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years of business. I'm not sure who says that. Small Business Development Corporation. That was the thing that I had to face when I quit my job as a microbiologist 10 years ago. And all my friends said to me, Peter, 90% of small business fail. You know, what makes you think you can make a living in small business, let alone public speaking? Why would you leave your highly paid job? So credibility of data is very important. Use the right language, the right jargon. I started to mention this in the first story. It's to do with the right lenses. So you may have stories, you may have jargon, acronyms, you may have different language. Choose the right language for the audience in the room. And Richard, you were in my workshop last week in Brisbane, and you'll remember I gave the same data which was supplied by the Heart Foundation of Australia in 2 different formats. So let me share this with everyone on the webinar. The human heart during an average lifetime will pump 350 billion litres of blood. So this is the heart, the size of a tennis ball, that pumps and moves our blood around. 350 billion litres of blood. When I'm working with your water authorities, so Colaban Water in Bendigo, North Eastern Rural Water in Albury-Wodonga, Southern Eastern Rural Water when I'm in Maffra, Sale, Water Corporation when I'm in West Australia. I haven't worked with water authorities in Queensland or Sydney. I say, go home and turn on your tap, your kitchen tap full bore for 45 years. That's 350 billion litres of water. Go home, turn on your kitchen tap full bore, leave it running for 45 years. That's 350 billion litres. But I also work with Chevron Oil and Gas on Barrow Island, and also with Rio Tinto and mining engineers. Therefore, I say 350 billion litres of blood is what your human heart pumps. That's equivalent to fill 3 of the world's biggest super tankers full of oil. 3 of the world's biggest massive super tankers side by side. This little baby, this little tennis ball sized pump in an average human lifetime will fill those 3 tankers with oil. And this is about making your data concrete. 350 billion litres is a number that not many people will remember. Turn on a kitchen tap for 45 years. Yep, I can remember that. 3 super tankers full of oil. Yep, I can remember that. But I've used different lenses for different audiences. When I tell my disability or my health stories, they work for a different audience. When I work with other audiences, the engineers, the mining sector, I need to have a different set of stories other than health. And it's more about safety and risk. So credibility is when you use the right language, the right jargon, the right stories. And this can be hard sometimes. I was lucky enough to be at a conference in the Gold Coast over the weekend, and a good friend of mine and one of Australia's best speakers, Glenn Capelli, he's an educator, he's a school teacher, he's a radio announcer, he loves adult learning, and he got invited to speak to a mining convention. How does this school teacher, radio announcer, educator, loves adult learning, how does this guy build credibility with a group of miners? He grew up in Kalgoorlie and went to school in Kalgoorlie to the age of 15. West Australia's top gold mining town. He played in some of the disused underground mines. Grew up in a mining town. He's built credibility. He's built trust. He now moves on to what he wants to talk about, which is adult learning. And that's how you use the right stories, the right jargon for different audiences. You put a different flavor on them. You need to know a different lens. Are there any comments, any questions on that aspect? Your experience of adversity and coming through success is brilliant for demonstrating your credibility, but it might only work with one audience. When I work with financial planners and superannuation consultants, I talk about my father who passed away without a will. And I, as the oldest son and the executor, had to work out his estate. And that's the right story to use with that audience. I don't use that story with the mining lobby. How are you going to build credibility before your next presentation? What could have you done in a previous presentation? Use your own story, your own experience, your successes, your coming through adversity, you're turning a pear-shaped project into a successful outcome project. Borrow experience. This is quotes other people's experience. What are the Canadians doing? Winston Churchill said, write and publish, speak at conferences. Even if it's in journals, this builds you credibility. Use data, but make sure it's reputable data. When you've got multiple data sources, this gives you more credibility, especially when you're proposing a new way of doing something or you're asking your audience to change. And then this is the framing or the lenses of the jargon, the stories, the right language. At the conference at the Gold Coast, we had some Americans, and one of the speakers was telling a story about Max Walker, who passed away last year, and cricket, but before he could do that, he had to frame the story for the Americans because Americans do not play cricket. If he'd just gone ahead and spoken about cricket and used cricket analogy, he would have not connected and had credibility with his audience, and he had to use baseball analogies. Next 2 webinars I love to help people is how to write a killer speech, Thursday, April the 10th, back to 9 a.m. and ways to end a presentation, 6 ways to end a presentation. The really great speakers nail their ending. Other speakers just stop talking. How are you going to end your presentation? 20th of April. Got some great workshops coming up all around Australia. Perth later on this month, then down to Bunbury in the southwest, over to Adelaide Mildura, also Bendigo. If any of you here are from Bendigo and Melbourne, let me know if you are interested in a workshop. And all of our topics, which you'll find on our website, we can design and deliver an in-house workshop for you. Should you have anywhere between six is not too small, up to 15 people, we can run an in-house workshop for you. Any final questions? So please remember, build credibility. You don't determine whether you're credible or not. The audience assigns your credibility. But there are things you can do to boost your chances of being seen as credible, to boost your ability to put forward a new, a controversial, a change, a disruptive, or an innovative way of doing things.